So we are in Joshua and we are starting in chapter 18. Sorry, I should have stuck something in there and I didn't do it. There we go. All righty. Now, just a quick little review. If you haven't gotten your chapter sections or if you've been working on them, chapters 1 through 5, this is when they're getting ready to go into the land. They haven't crossed the Jordan. They're getting ready to go. And in chapter 5, they actually cross the Jordan River. So then our next 7 chapters, 6 through 12, that's all of these battles. That's Jericho, that's Ai. There's all these big battles for these big centers, these bigger cities. In chapters 13 through 17 that we looked at last week, then we saw land being given to the tribes as their inheritance, but we also see God really backing Joshua down. And while he doesn't give Joshua an excuse and say, okay, you don't have to lead these people anymore, he did say, you know what? You don't need to fight. You're old. You're done with your conquering days. Let them go and fight for their land. You don't need to do that anymore. And then what we'll see today in chapters 18 through 21, this is still the land being given out to those tribes. And in 18 and 19, that's those last 7 tribes that have been really kind of slow and getting going. And then in our last couple of chapters, chapters 20 and 21, we're going to see 3 of Levi's sons, and we're going to then look at the priesthood. Now, hopefully this will work because I'm going to do something I've not done before. So I've got my IT guy here ready to help me. In chapter 18, verse 1, what did they do?
Gathered at Shiloh.
They gathered at Shiloh, and what did they build?
The tabernacle.
They built the tabernacle, and the land was subdued before them. Now, why Shiloh? All right, I hit this button, right? This button. And then what do? I get out of this, right?
No, flip to the bottom where it says share.
Oh, that one. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yay. Okay. Now how do I move it?
You see the arrows if you move your cup?
This one? Okay. All right, yay. Okay, so skip all that, right? So in Shiloh, when they built this tabernacle, and they called it the tent of meeting, but it was a tabernacle, the tabernacle actually stood for about 369 years. So this was not a quick little set it up, tear it down kind of a situation that they were in. It was actually there until the Ark of the Covenant was taken into the battle and captured by the Philistines at Aphek in 1 Samuel chapter 4. Now, where have we heard of Aphek before? Where have we heard kind of that name? Just last week, Caleb, at 85 years old, went and destroyed 3 of the giant sons of Aphek and took the land at 85, while, tens of thousands of tribesmen from Manasseh and Ephraim were just sitting around complaining. So it's not moving. Okay. So the tabernacle actually remained in Shiloh through the time of the judges. So when we start in 2 weeks, our study of Judges, then when we talk about the tabernacle, we're only going to be talking about the tabernacle in Shiloh. It has not been moved to Jerusalem. Samuel was dedicated by his mom, Hannah, in that temple, and that is actually where Eli ministered from in 1 Samuel chapter 3. After the Ark of the Covenant was taken, it really wandered around for a while from place to place. I mean, it went into hiding. And then we saw that David went and got it and brought it back and was dancing. And it went to Gibeon. And it stayed there in a holy site under David and Solomon until Solomon built the temple, because we know that David was told he could not build the temple because he was a man of war, that it would be done under the direction of Solomon. And we looked at this in depth when we did our Kings and Prophets study. And we talked about why was it in Gibeon. So what happened to Shiloh? Where did the actual city go? What happened to it? Why, after the Philistines came or went, actually took the Ark of the Covenant because it was taken in a battle when they were told not to take it out of the temple of Shiloh. What actually happened to Shiloh? Now, I will tell you there is a Shiloh actually there's two places called Shiloh in modern day Israel, but they're not real sure if that was actually the original site of where Shiloh actually was. So in 1 Kings chapters 11 and 14, there was this man named Abijah, who, along with Jeroboam, actually instigated this revolt against David's grandson, Rehoboam. Now, what's the big deal and what does that have to do with Shiloh? Well, he was called a Shilonite. So if he was called a Shilonite, obviously it was still part of Israel. It was still around in the time of David's grandson. 300 years later, though, during Jeremiah's prophecies, Shiloh was in ruins. So Shiloh was no more. As a matter of fact, Jeremiah used the destruction of Shiloh as in his prophecies to Israel, saying, this is what's going to happen to you. If you don't come back to God, if you don't do what God says, then you're just going to be in ruins, just like Shiloh. And then that's the last time we ever hear about Shiloh, except the name means peace and tranquility, but it interestingly enough also means he whose it is, or he to whom it belongs. Why is this such a big deal? At least to me, it was a big deal. Would somebody read Genesis chapter 49, verse 10? This is the very first time that Shiloh is ever mentioned. Just somebody, whoever can click their fingers or flip their pages the fastest. Genesis chapter 49, verse 10.
Says the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of all the people.
So, what is Shiloh referring to there? Is it a place or is it a person?
Sounds like a person, like Jesus.
Anybody else? As it says, a scepter, which is royalty, will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes.
Oh, okay.
And to him will be the obedience of the people.
Because mine says, until he to whom it belongs shall come.
Yes, and that's what Shiloh means. That is Shiloh.
So I'm going to put that in parentheses.
And that is Shiloh. So is this a messianic prophecy? Or is this a prophecy about the temple?
Well, a temple, and it's not going to have a ruler's staff between his feet.
So then who is it then? I believe it's a messianic prophecy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I believe it's a messianic prophecy.
I believe it's a messianic prophecy. Then we looked at Deuteronomy chapter 12 in our homework. And that's where Moses told Israel that once you go into the land, God's going to give you rest and he would choose a place for his name to dwell. And that would be Shiloh. That's cool because look how it covers both meanings of the name. God will give you rest. We read in chapter 1, verse 1, the land was subdued before them. They were at peace. They were at rest. And he would choose a place for his name to dwell. He whose it is, or he to whom it belongs. It covers both of them. So now you know more about Shiloh probably than you ever wanted to, but I thought this was really cool. Just some really neat about why Shiloh. And I always thought Shiloh, that the tabernacle was there for just such a very short time. And then, in researching and studying and not reading commentaries, found out that it was actually there for quite a while. Okay, now how do I get rid of it?
Red.
Red. Oh, and this other thing. All righty. Any questions so far? We've gotten through one whole verse of one of the chapters. Any questions? Any questions just about what we just talked about? About Shiloh, about the land. All righty. Now we see in starting in verse 10, some of the tribes already had their land. They already had divided their inheritance. They're getting ready to go. 7 tribes had not. Judah, Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben all had their stuff done.
Yeah, admit.
Where?
Honey.
Okay.
Okay.
So they all had their land already, but 7 didn't. And Joshua finally, he's got to be fed up with these people. And he's like, look, folks, how long do you plan on putting off going in and getting your land? Because first of all your people are mooching off of other people who already have their land. So you need to get in there. You need to go in. You need to fight for it. You need to divide it among your families. And you need to get going on this. This is ridiculous. So, in true Israelite fashion, each one of those 7 tribes sent 3 men out to go scout out the land and to kind of describe it to them. They brought back those descriptions to Joshua in Shiloh, where the temple was, and Joshua cast lots. And so at the end of chapter 18, who finally gets their land? What tribe?
Benjamin.
Benjamin. Benjamin finally goes into his land, his little teeny tiny little piece of land that he got.
My dad used to call me El Benjamin.
The
'cause I was
Benjamin.
last.
Then in chapter 19, we start to see it's just a lot of division of the land. And if you want your maps, if you take your maps out, you can kind of see this a little better. But Simeon actually had some land that was within Judah's inheritance, but we don't see that there was like any kind of argument or anything about it. And in the prophetic blessing that Jacob gave them in Genesis 49, he actually said that Simeon and Levi would actually be dispersed in Israel. And we see that indeed Levi was dispersed through Israel when we get to chapters 20 and 21. So they were kind of dispersed. They kind of, they didn't have one little place. All they were dispersed. We saw Zebulun was to the north between Galilee and the Mediterranean. And Issachar was south of Zebulun, and Asher was north. It was actually close to the Mediterranean Sea. All the Mediterranean Sea, we're going to see later in history, those were the places, number one, that were very prosperous. They had eventually they had fishing trade. They also had a lot of import export, and unfortunately they tended to be where enemies would land with their sea navies and go in to conquer. So while it was really nice land, it wasn't always. Naphtali was between Jordan and Zebulun and Asher. It was the most northern tribe up there with Asher. So Naphtali and Asher were way, way up north. I will also tell you that close to Asher, who was close to the Mediterranean Sea, Zebulun, between the Mediterranean Sea and the Sea of Galilee in the Mediterranean, probably about 10 months ago, a United States submarine was actually there and popped its head up just to let Hamas know that they were there, and then bubbled back down.
Hello.
Our son was not on that sub. I will tell you, he was safe at home. He was deployed, but he was not on that sub. But yes, the United States allowed the sub to pop its head up just to let them know, and then bubbled right back down again in the Mediterranean Sea. just to let them know we're there. Then we have Dan, they were toward Joppa. And then Joshua actually got his own land, which who here would argue with the poor guy getting his own land, right? Who here would have a problem? Nobody should have a problem. But he got land in his own tribe. He didn't go and try to take land from other people. He didn't try to go in and, elbow his way into, necessarily the best land or the biggest lot of land. I mean, he didn't. Could he have? Absolutely, he could have. But he wasn't that kind of a leader. He took his place among his people in his tribe, and then he got his own land in Ephraim, which was in the hill country. And that's really chapter 19. It's just more land divided. Anybody have any questions whatsoever about how the land was divided?
With lots.
How quickly you actually just kind of ran through chapter 19. A lot of geography. If you're not a geography person, I feel you. So anybody at all? Yes.
Not a question. I just thought it was interesting to see how similar that land deed was to today's land deeds.
I
Yeah.
don't have anything for you. Nothing.
With in regards to what though?
Well, the oak in, I can't remember the name of it, in da-da-da, to this place, to this place, to the brook along this border.
Mm-hmm.
The land deed to our property is exactly the same.
Oh, to your personal property. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's from the blaze, the burl walnut to the rock, and I just thought they haven't changed.
No, and we actually, not we, my parents owned property in Mannington that belonged to my father's family, and the deed was handwritten in the 1800s, in the mid 1800s. And that's what it says. The land is from this tree over here, which no longer exists, until this pond over here, which has been dried up for, a century, and then over here. And so it's really funny reading the plots, but they knew exactly where they were. I mean, and notice this doesn't say that your land, you're going to go take over where, this Canaanite tribe used to be.
Right.
And you're going to go take over where this, Canaanite city used to be. It doesn't say that.
Right. It's talking about a proper land
Right.
area.
Exactly.
And they're giving landmarks for the most part. I mean, there is that one oak reference in there, which I thought was hysterical, but they are trying to give you proper landmarks so that you can know where you are.
Yes. And that's, and notice there were no fences that needed being built. There were no, you knew where you were, you knew where your land was, you knew who your people were. And, there wasn't a big fight. We don't see at this point anybody fighting each other for it. This was just where it was. And it seemed to me, except for Manasseh, kind of getting whiny about it when we looked at it last week, but it seems to me that these tribes, everybody's okay with where they are.
Yeah.
There's
I
not a
thought
lot.
that
Go ahead.
with especially with Simeon getting plonked right in the middle of Judah.
Yeah.
Because they could have put him on the edge, but
Yeah.
they didn't. They plonked him right in the middle of Judah, and Judah didn't seem to have a problem with that, nor did Simeon.
No, not at all. And, how, and it just got me, to thinking, even in families, but even in congregations, no, not in ours. I hope not. I don't think. If it is, it's very quiet. Just the backbiting to try to get over and above, well, this person, I could do better. I'm going to do better. I can do this. I can do that. How come they get to do it? Why do they get to be the ones, to do this? And how come I'm not? And how come I'm never asked? And And there's so much infighting, and there's so much, headbutting and grasping and climbing over top of people. I know corporate is ridiculous. Um, uh, and just climbing on people's backs. This is land. I mean, this is land. This is their life. This is their livelihood. This is where they're going to be for generations. And we don't see that here at all. Everybody just says, well, we're here. Here we've got it. They fought for it for 7 years. Then they went back to fighting individually. And here they are in their land. And they're thriving. It's divided. They now have a temple. They have a tabernacle. They have a tabernacle in Shiloh. They have a proper place of worship. They have a place that they can go and do their sacrifices and have the priesthood minister to them and follow the Mosaic law with all of the, the different sin offerings. And now they can finally properly have all of their feasts and festivals. So they are in the land. They are building houses. They are tending to their crops. They are building their families up. Folks are getting settled. It's actually starting to look like a nation, like it's supposed to look. But God's not done yet.
So what about Dan? Dan was not very happy. And so why did they move from the south to the north? And they captured that city for what purpose? And did they all go?
Yeah, they all went because they had some issues with the Philistines. They had some issues with Philistines. They didn't like it. I'm trying to think. I believe the Philistines were up in the hill and they were down below. And they just kept bugging them and causing and wreaking havoc. So Dan basically picked up and they moved north. Now, did all of them go? I don't believe all of them went. I think some of them stayed there, but Dan did go north.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. So, I mean, did they not keep their inheritance spot of land? I mean, what happened to that?
Philistines.
Huh.
It doesn't take us very long to see that all along that coastal land, especially when you look at Joppa. I mean, a lot of that went to pot, even when we think of Jonah.
Okay.
And why Jonah went so far south to Joppa. He went so far south to Joppa because he couldn't go to the port that was right next to him because people would see him. And if they knew he was running from God, if a prophet is running from God, what do you think the people are going to start doing? They're going to jump on the boat with him and they're going to go wherever that prophet decides to go. He didn't want to do that. He didn't want anybody to know what he was doing. So that's why he traveled so far down south to Joppa where nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew. And that way he could actually get on a ship kind of in secret and in private. Right up until it wasn't anymore. So then God told them one more thing that they needed to do. They needed to build some cities. And these were going to be some pretty special cities. And they were going to be cities of refuge.
Mhm.
And these were not cities of refuge for their enemies or for people to run to if there was a war that was going to, a battle that was coming to their land. This was not a stronghold that they could run to. This was for a very specific person. And then we are very quickly introduced to two people. And who are those people that we are introduced to? Now, they don't have names, they have titles. So what were the titles of their names?
Manslayer.
Yeah.
Manslayer. And who was the other one?
Avenger of Blood.
The Avenger of Blood. New Marvel character coming soon, right? The Avenger of Blood. And you had a chart in your homework that you could fill out talking about or comparing, I guess, the difference between a manslayer and an avenger of blood. Now, we actually have looked at these people before. Last spring, when we studied Kinsman Redeemer. We looked at manslayer and we looked at kinsman redeemer, or the avenger of blood. And the avenger of blood in Hebrew is the Gaal. That is the kinsman redeemer. He's the one who avenges, or the one who revenges someone who died. So, what was the refuge city? What was their purpose?
It was where they could go if they were innocent,
Yeah, cooling down period.
premeditated murder, or
Accidental.
Accidental.
Yeah. What we would call now manslaughter. Is that accidental?
mhm.
Yeah,
So
involuntary.
it was a
manslaughter.
place he could go and he could stay safe. He was the one who was going, and he was the one who was a refuge. And they gave an example. And what was the example?
The head flew off your axe and hit your helper person and killed him.
Yeah. So I'm chopping wood and my axe head flies off and it smacks Sue in the head and Sue dies. I didn't mean for her to die. I love Sue. I didn't mean for her to die. She was there to help me. Now I got to haul all this wood by myself. I didn't want her to die. So I need to get myself to a refuge city. And there, they're going to judge me. And if they say, oh, yeah, you know what? It was an accident. She didn't mean to do it. I'm stuck there. You ever heard the saying, a gilded cage is still a cage? Yeah. So even if it's a beautiful cage, it's still a cage. And so I'm stuck in that city. I can't go home. I can't send for my family. I'm stuck there.
So your family couldn't join you?
Until
I don't know, because I thought about that, but I don't know, because you could have had a big, humongous family.
I think they could.
But now I'm not at home. I'm not tending my crops. I'm not tending to my family. But I only have to stay there until when?
The judge dies.
Not the judge,
Priest.
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 The
the
high priest?
high priest. So if you're going to accidentally kill somebody, accidentally kill him when the high priest is like on his deathbed. And then once the high priest is dead, I can go home. I can go home and the Gaal can never touch me. I'm done. I've done my time. I am free to go.
So that death warrant is vacated in effect
It's absolutely vacated.
when the high priest dies.
Yes, when the high priest dies. Now, if I am actually guilty of murder, now murder and killing are two totally different concepts in a Hebrew mindset. If I am found guilty of murder, they can't keep me in a refuge city. They kick me out.
Right.
And they literally will hand me over to my executioner. And I'm done for. I'm dead. I'm done. Because you have to purge the blood of the innocent from the land. And the only way to purge it is blood. So I would have to be gone to be able to purge the land from the shedding of that blood. Now, according to Numbers 35, who actually got to decide whether I was guilty or not?
Did I look at
The whole congregation.
Mhm.
Oh, that's
There
right.
was no 12 men of my peers. It's the congregation of the city. So the whole congregation of the city got to come together, hear all the evidence, figure it all out, and they decided whether I was guilty of killing someone accidentally or if I was guilty of murder. And if I'm guilty, I'm done. But who had to do it? Who had to execute me?
Kinsman
Might have
redeemer.
been.
Yeah, the kinsman redeemer had to be the one who killed me. Nobody else could. It had to be the Gaal. If I was innocent, then I had to stay there until the death of the high priest. what happened if I left before the high priest died?
The Redeemer
The
could kill you.
kinsman redeemer could kill you.
Yeah. And then would he be guilty of murder?
Nope.
No.
Would he then have to go to a refuge city because now he was guilty of manslaughter?
No.
No,
Murder, not manslaughter.
no, he was done. He was not ever found guilty. He never had to run to one of these refuge cities. His hands were wiped clean if I stepped foot. Now, the elders could not be paid or could not be given a ransom. There was no parole. They could not allow a murderer to live. So if I'm rich, I can't run to a refuge city and pay them to keep me safe. Because you talk about war. I mean, you talk about somebody coming and starting a war, couldn't do it. Nor could they allow me to leave early and remain unavenged. So once you're there, you're not going to pay your way out. I mean, honestly, you just need to, thank God that, you did something that was not on purpose and that there was actually a place for you to go and to stay safe. Now, what kind of life that they would live in these refuge cities, I have no idea. Were they outcasts in that city? Were they given a job? We don't know. It doesn't go into that much detail. So, where were these cities located? First, how many cities were there?
Well,
6.
Six.
six.
There were 6. There were 3 places west of the Jordan, and there were 3 places east of the Jordan. And if you mark them off on your map, they are all very centrally located and kind of spread out. So really, no matter where you were, it would be really easy for anybody to access it. It would not be difficult for somebody to get to a refuge city if they needed it. Now, I know a lot of the question, or there's one question, at least I had it. What happens if they catch you before you get to a refuge city? What happens if the kinsman redeemer catches up with you?
You're dead.
But could he avenge someone who had not been found guilty?
No.
I don't think so.
I don't think they could.
Uh-uh.
I don't think they could, because what would then happen if if it was an accident? He just committed murder and now he's running for some kind of refuge city. I mean, we could go round and round in circles and never get anywhere. So I don't think the Gaal comes into play until after the congregation in that refuge city actually had a trial and made a decision, which begs another thought. Who's to say that somebody you don't like comes running into your city, or someone from a tribe you don't like? What's to stop you from just saying that he's guilty of murder and letting him get rid of him?
God's wrath.
What happens if it was your family member? What's to stop people? I mean, these are still human beings. These are still human people out in the desert, still trying to figure out everything.
Well, I don't understand if that's the case, if you can't kill somebody before they reach the refuge city, then what's the purpose of having a refuge city?
Because that's where they would be found guilty or not guilty. That's where they would either be found guilty of accidentally killing someone, of being of manslaughter, or guilty of murdering someone on purpose.
The only place where they had those trials
are the cities of refuge. Yes. And it makes sense, because who actually inherited these refuge cities?
the Levites.
The Levites. The priests who would know the laws of God,
True.
who would know the law, who would know the Levitical law, because there's a lot of, oh gosh, if a donkey does this, and if a horse does this, and if your maid does this, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of these. Who better to sit in judgment of someone, and you would hope and pray judge fairly, than the Levites? And so every one of these 6 refuge cities was part of the inheritance of the Levites. We are told that the Levites actually don't get a big hunk of land like all the other tribes did, because God is their inheritance. But they still got these cities within the other tribes. They had families. We talked about this last week. They had families. They had wives. They had children. They had parents. They had people who needed them to work, that needed land for them to farm, that needed animals, that needed, commerce, that needed them. So they were allowed to have land within the other tribes. They just weren't allowed to have a huge plot of land that said, this is the land for the tribe of Levi. God spread them out. So then part of the land that they got were these 6 refuge cities. And this fulfills the prophetic blessing of Jacob, saying that the Levites, or that Levi, would be dispersed throughout all of Israel. And that's why it happened. Now, when Jacob was blessing all of his sons and then his 2 grandsons that he adopted, did he know that Levi was going to be the priestly tribe? He didn't have a clue. But he said Simeon and Levi would be dispersed, and they actually absolutely were. Now, Levi himself had 3 sons. Kohat, Gershon, and Merari. Not sure where they got Merari. And Moses and Aaron were both from Kohat. And we also know that priests come from the tribe of Levi, but only the high priest from the line of Aaron. So Aaron got 13 cities. The rest of the ones from the son of Kohat were given 10 cities, and the Gershonites 13, and the Merarites 12. So all in all, they had 48 different cities given to the Levites, including those ever infamous 6 cities of refuge. Why would the priests not all be given land in Shiloh around the temple, which would make sense? Why were they put all over Israel?
I think
A centralized area for. I'm trying to use all my words. So they wouldn't be centralized in one. Yeah, they wouldn't be centralized.
Why else? Why would God put them all over the place? Why would he put them in 43 different, or 48? 48, I'm sorry, 48 different cities. Why? Why would God put them all over?
He wanted his priests all over so that they could have his law available to all of his people.
The minister.
Yeah. And if they were all around the temple, are people going to go all the time, every time, all the way to Shiloh? If we're thinking way down south, way up north, we have people who won't go to church when it's, a 3-minute walk across the street. I mean, and people aren't always going to go. Now, does anyone, before we get into, because believe it or not, this is all, I mean, this is like 45 minutes, right? But I have some things I want to really unpack and apply to us. So, but before we do, does anyone have any questions whatsoever about things that we have talked about? The slides, I'm assured by my tech man that they will be, if you've missed anything or wanted to write anything down, they will be on the recording. So I am told. If not, yell at Oscar.
Wow.
Okay, now I hit this right.
Share.
And I hit this right. Oops, that's not what I want.
Oh,
It's not. Okay. So if no one has anything, we're going to look at the responsibilities of the priesthood. What were the responsibilities of the priests? What were they supposed to do?
Interpret the law.
One of the things they were supposed to do is, what Everly said. They had to teach the law of the Lord to the people in word. So they had to know it, they had to follow it, and they had to teach it. They also had to live holy lives, not lying, not being drunk, speaking only in the truth. So they also had to be obedient, not only in word, but also in deed. We were looking at a people, they were scattered all throughout the land. So exactly what Everly said. Everybody would be taught by their speaking the law of God, but also by seeing and looking at a righteous living being carried out by the priesthood. So righteous living, righteous being lived out in purpose, in word, and in deed by the priesthood. Would anybody then have any excuses? They probably have a million excuses. Would they have any reason? Absolutely not. What could they say? This is the Great Commission way before Matthew 28, 19, and 20. Go into all the world and preach. And that's what they were doing. Not just in what they said, but also in watching what they do. 5 years ago, my mom and I, Oscar gave us an amazing gift, and we got to go back to Louisiana to a reunion of a congregation that we belonged to, Wimbard Avenue Baptist Church, that had been had turned into a women's shelter and then turned back into a church, a congregation. When we went to go visit and to go see the neighborhood where we used to live and to see the house, there was a man who lived across the street, or who lived across from our house, that lived in the house that old crazy Margaret used to live in, old crazy Margaret and Bobby. South Louisiana, my mom used to have to close the windows when good old crazy Margaret and Bobby used to get into it, because they used a lot of vocabulary they didn't want us to use. And we got to talk to the guy, and I came to find out that he was a contractor, and he bought a lot of these old houses. This neighborhood had turned into a drug-infested party neighborhood. A lot of homeless people were breaking in to people's houses, a lot of gun violence, a lot of drive-by shootings. And he and another guy decided to buy these homes, fix them if they could, tear them down if they had to, and build homes for families. And he said, that's not good enough. I moved my wife and our 3 young children into this neighborhood from a very affluent neighborhood where he lived. And he said, and I'm parking my car or my truck, my work truck, in front of my house that has my name on it, because I want to be an example to these young people of what a man can accomplish. So what kind of example would I be if I still lived in my affluent neighborhood, telling people by lip service that I believed in this neighborhood if I didn't believe enough to move my wife and our 3 children into the neighborhood. And that's exactly what he did. I believe his life was just like these priests. He lived there. He was an example. His kids didn't go to private school. They went to school with the other kids in the neighborhood. They walked the streets in the evening, showed that they weren't afraid. And that neighborhood, in 5 years, he said, had completely changed. The drug dealers were gone. The crime rate was nil to nothing. And other families were moving into that neighborhood where once there was absolutely nothing. And here's the question. If believers, put your name in there, if I personally did what I'm supposed to do, live that godly, righteous life, speak the truth, teach the correct actual law of God, how would that impact the life and culture of the people around us?
Crucify you.
No, they didn't crucify this guy.
Comes,
So,
Jesus.
yeah. So how would that impact our life and our culture? If we truly lived, and I'm not saying that we're not, but if we lived, if we chose to stop being afraid, if we chose to stop being quiet, if we chose and I don't even remember what his name is, but I will never forget the conversation we had. We had like a 45-minute conversation. If we actually went in there and said, you know what? It does no good for me to have lip service over here if I'm not going to put my lips out there. If I'm not going to live and let other people see me living the way I'm supposed to live, nothing's going to change. And to be brave enough to step out there and to go do it. To live like we talked about last week, if we have God or because we have God, so what? So what? I feel like we have been in this perpetual cycle, we as a nation, and probably, us also as individuals have been in this perpetual cycle of distress, of uncertainty, of kind of low level or maybe high level of anxiety. And we're coming around again to this lovely day called election, November the 5th. We're coming back around. What would it impact our community regardless of who won if we live this way? If we live the regardless of what they say, regardless of what they do, we have God. And that's the way I'm going to live. How would that impact our culture? Is our culture the way it is because we stopped living that way? It's this discussion.
It's pretty obvious that we have. I mean, we were considered, and we were, in history it was said that, America was discovered because of religious freedom, which was part of it, but it wasn't all of it. And yes, it was under Judeo-Christian values that our Constitution and everything else, but that's being broken down because that is godly, and the owner of this dirt doesn't want godly right now. So, yes.
And then begs the next question. What are you going to do about it? What are we going to do? What can we do? I mean, sitting here in our homes, that makes life like really nice and easy. And it's easy to talk about, what do you call this? Arbitrary. But honestly, what can we do about it? I'm going to talk about Mike right now. I see Mike as a person who's living this out because he stepped into someone else's vision to build a house for recovery in Salem, who has not been very open and friendly to anything Horizons. Let's just put it that way. And yet he and Christine have chosen to step out and to make a place for 6 women who would not have a place otherwise, to have a sober living facility. And I've been in the house, and it's got work to be done, but it is beautiful. It is a beautiful, beautiful home. I look at his example, I look at Christine's example, and I think, wow, those are people who are really laying it and really being the face of recovery in Salem. And I know some things have been tried, and I know some things have been done that maybe didn't work out the way, we thought they were, or that they would. And we did have to kind of switch gears. But that didn't mean that we stopped. That didn't mean that the work stopped. We may have had to go in a different direction. God may have said, okay, hold on. That's not your fight right now. This is what you need to do. And course correct, but it didn't stop. And because it didn't stop, there's going to be 6 women who are going to have jobs, who are going to have a place to call home, who are going to have pride in the way that they lived. And you know what? Maybe a few of them will backslide. Maybe they will. But that doesn't mean it stops. That just means 2 more people come in and we try again. And so when I see Mike, and when I see Christine, and when I hear her stand up on Sunday mornings talking about the things that are going on, that's what I see. I see the people stepping out and trying to be the true hands and feet of God and show them, maybe not totally righteous, we're all sinners, I get that, but they are still showing an example of what can be done. What can be done? And they're not sitting around and waiting for somebody else to do it. That's what I see. And that's an impact on life and on the culture of the people, maybe only in Salem. Maybe only in Salem. But the Jews have a saying, he who saves one saves the world in time. We don't know where this is going to go. We don't know. But God does, and he obviously wanted it. So, anyone else? Anyone else? I have nothing else to add. Anyone have anything? I know this was a crazy lesson. Anyone have anything else that they just want to add? I mean, we've been through 21 chapters. We've only got a few more to go. I didn't remember, so I'm cheating. I am looking to 24. We have 22, 23, 3 more chapters to go in the book of Joshua.
Well, I think very interesting how our country chooses to use biblical principles when they want to.
Mm-hmm.
As in refuge cities.
Yeah, they twisted that one around, didn't they?
Yeah.
The big one I always laugh at is when they say, oh, but you can't judge me. That's in the Bible. Well, actually, if you're a believer, it says that we are to judge you. We can't pass judgment,
Right.
but we can judge your actions and tell you you're on the wrong path. You need to go back to God. So if you claim to be a believer, absolutely we can judge your actions. We just cannot pronounce judgment. That is God's. But yeah, we are. I mean, why would we not? How could that be loving if you just let a believer go off into their tangent, whatever, and not want to go behind? That doesn't even make sense to me. But they'll use it. One of the absolute craziest scriptural debates I ever had was with someone who knew, I mean, they knew scripture inside and out, and was a very, very devout atheist.
Oh, that happens all the time. I see that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
They read it so they can argue against you.
Oh, and they twisted. I'm not saying he had correct context and all that, but boy, if you don't know what you're talking about, if you don't know your scripture, you can get hung up on an argument, on a scriptural debate with an atheist.
Well,
Yep.
the example was given with Jesus and Satan when he was tempted the 40 days.
Right.
And I have to laugh at atheists because it's like, demons believe in God. Satan believes in God. The demons recognized Jesus when his own disciples didn't necessarily recognize who Jesus was as a son of God. Demons knew, and they were afraid. They were smart enough to be afraid.
Yeah.
What's wrong? Oh. So anyone else at all? I mean, I know you guys are about to get out really, really early, but shh, don't tell Miriam and Sarah they have our boys.